following is an extended product spotlight paid for by BASF Canada and InVigor Hybrid Canola. Hey everyone, I'm Sean Haney, host of Real Ag Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM, as well as founder of Real Agriculture. And I'm here to welcome you to the fourth episode of the Canola PODcast, sponsored by InVigor Hybrid Canola from BASF. The series was designed to highlight useful tips and tricks growers can bring to their canola fields to help make every acre count. On today's episode, we're tackling myths about canola seed performance. And here with me to break down the topic is Rob MacDonald. He's the manager of Agronomic Excellence at BASF. Welcome, Rob.
Morning, Sean.
It's great to chat with you. Okay, so Rob, let's get to it here. I'm looking forward to this topic. It's a very, very important one. We're trying to get that seed out of the ground as evenly and timely as possible to get some of those ideal yields. The idea or myth that's going around right now is that seed size affects performance. Is it true that smaller seed doesn't perform as well as maybe the larger seed?
Well, it's a good question, Sean, because, there's actually some truth to that, in that really small seeds, and I'm talking tiny seeds, really don't perform. But where the myth falls apart is that there's an idea that as seed gets bigger, it gets better. And that's not true. Our research and a lot of complementary researchers done by other scientists has really demonstrated that there's more of a threshold in seed size that impacts performance. So it's the really small seed that doesn't perform. And what do I mean by really small seed? Well, we're talking about seeds like 3 gram TSW, 3.5 gram TSW. These are the seeds that we used to handle 15 years ago. Like when we talk about, say, the early days with Polish canola, these were really tiny seeds. And these were more of a challenge to get these small seeds out of the ground, and they just didn't perform. The product we're bringing to the market is so different than the product from 10, 15 years ago that it really changes the dynamic about this whole seed size myth.
Okay, so considering that some of these really small seeds may underperform, do any of these underperforming seeds actually make it into the InVigor bag, or do you have a way of ensuring that doesn't happen?
Well, that's been a really important part of the research that we've been doing, is trying to determine how do we put the most consistent performing and high performing seeds into the bag of InVigor. And, we've really developed a refined conditioning process to remove those smaller underperforming seeds from the bag. And, we don't have to look any further than some research that was, sponsored by the Canola Council, published by SAS Canola, that demonstrated, regardless of the seed size for the InVigor, 2 InVigor seed lots that were tested, they had the same performance throughout the season, from emergence through establishment, right through to final yield, that we get that consistent performance independent of seed size.
So, Rob, getting back to this even performance, no matter the seed size, how do we know this? Like, how do you know that all your seed size ranges will actually perform at the same level, so that when I'm going to my retail, I'm not like, I want this size because I know this gives a higher yield? If that's not the case, how do we know it?
Well, it's taken a lot of research, a lot of effort to prove that point out. Because, before we came to the market with InVigor RATE and with our different seed sizes, from the A through D, we wanted to have full confidence in that product that we're bringing to the market. So we've got about 5 years of data of really intensive field trials comparing the whole range of our seed sizes. And we've done this for multiple years, multiple locations in replicated trials. And this is the one thing that comes out consistent in our studies is equivalent performance. Even in our demonstration tours that we do in the field season, where we get growers out and to look at the trials, we'll put the different seed size ranges side by side in the field. Let the growers walk through and have them tell us which size seed they think they're looking at and compare. And most often they pick wrong. It's kind of an entertaining exercise, but we just see really equivalent performance between these different seed size ranges, both in the trials, in these demonstrations, and in the hands of our customers.
Yeah, it's kind of like athletes. The size doesn't matter. It's the heart that counts, I guess. So I got to ask this. Why even go down this direction then with seed sizes? And isn't it just making things more complicated for producers to calibrate something like their seeder?
That question comes up quite often as well. Are we making things more complicated than they need to be? And the reality is quite different. Before we went to these 4 seed size ranges, I can think back to years where we had, say, in our product offering, we had over 20 different TSWs in a huge range. So a grower would go to retail, pick up his seed, and he could have multiple different 1,000 seed weights in the bag, anywhere from 4 to 6 and everything in between. And really, to get optimum performance, he'd need to calibrate for each different lot that he was handling for that specific TSW. InVigor RATE and bringing together these 4 ranges actually simplifies the calibration for the grower, breaks it down to 4 simple calibrations that he needs to perform. And in often cases, the grower can just get 1 seed size range, and which really further simplifies things, having 1 calibration. So although it sounds like we're making things more difficult with these different ranges, it's actually simplifying things for the grower. Just moving to, a 10-acre bag and 4 seed size ranges to simplify calibration for the grower. It doesn't change the fact that it's super important to calibrate. This is the most important step the grower can do preparing for seeding.
Yeah, it's that KISS method, right? Absolutely. Okay, so what about a planter? Okay, because we're seeing more and more growers thinking about or have been using a planter to put their canola in the ground. Is there one range of seed size that's more suitable for use in a planter?
Yeah, planters are gaining in popularity, and there can be some real benefits to using a planter for seeding canola, particularly as related for getting improvements in the consistency of seed depth. And but we have to keep in mind one thing with planters is they weren't built for handling canola. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. The sensors that are built into them were built for larger, coarser seeds. They're built for corn and soybeans, and canola seed is significantly smaller than those. That's no secret. So first thing to keep in mind is you can't necessarily trust that sensor. So does that create challenges for calibration? You bet it does, because say with a corn or soybean, the grower can just rely on that seed sensor. It's going to give them an accurate picture, really simplifies calibration. With canola, regardless of seed size, you've got an additional hurdle of challenge with the sensor that's on the machine. That creates some additional challenges. The other is the planter units themselves weren't built like the discs. The discs have been modified to handle canola seed sizes. The system itself wasn't built or tailor-made for handling small seeds. So that just creates additional challenges. So calibration becomes very, very important to get that accurate population down. And that really goes independent of seed size. You can make a mess of calibration with your planter kind of regardless of seed size. So would I say, is there one seed size that's better than another? We've had success planting canola with our full seed size range between 4 gram and 6 gram TSW. That's working quite well with the discs that are out there. But as I mentioned, super important to get the calibration right. Don't trust that seed sensor. Do a good calibration to make sure you're hitting target.
So while we're talking about the precision of all of this, the other topic that comes to mind is depth, because that's an important component too, to get that seed launched out of the ground as quickly and evenly as possible to get that ideal emergence to stay on that optimum yield curve. What have you been seeing in some of your research when it comes to depth?
Great question, Sean, because really ties into this whole discussion on seed size and generally myths about canola, because for a long time, the real adage for seeding canola, and everybody remembers it, shallow up and slow down. So, trying to highlight the advantages of shallow seeding canola, because it's a small seed, right? So why wouldn't you want to seed it shallow? Well, in some dry seasons that we've experienced, you learn pretty darn quickly that there can be some real challenges with shallow seeding and stranding seeds in dry seed bed. So we've been, very active in this area of trying to identify, important targets for seeding depth, and not just going with trying to seed as shallow as possible. In fact, we're finding that it's important. Number one, important thing is consistency of depth. That's very, very important. We want to get that crop up as evenly as possible. Second is we want to actually keep those seeds out of the most shallow range. And that top layer, I call it the kill zone, because that top layer gets so hot. It's, the organic matter is desiccated in that top quarter inch. We've got to keep seeds out of there. Back 15, 20 years ago, when I first started seeding canola, we wanted to see some seeds on the surface. If we didn't have seeds on the surface, we felt we were too deep. Now we know that seeing seeds on the surface, that's just a waste of money. So we're targeting deeper depths. But, don't want to get in a long discussion on seed depth. I think the best way to talk about seed depth is to get out to the field, have a look, come to some of our demonstration sites, have a look at seeding depth demos, and see what the real impact is of seed depth, and basically how InVigor seed forms, how these different seed size range perform at different seeding depths, and see them firsthand. We can talk about it all day, but seeing it firsthand is really of great value.
Hey, great stuff. Hey, Rob, thanks so much for joining me here today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Sean.
We want to wish everybody out there all the best this spring. Encourage you to go to canolaschool.com. Work very closely with BASF on that project, provides you with 30 agronomic videos throughout the growing season. So please check that out. And thanks for listening.